for joining me. My name is Miranda Metcalf. I'm the Sales and Programming Director at SAC Gallery in Bangkok. And I am delighted to be bringing you a conversation with TASHI BraueN, who's joining us from Zurich. We'll be bringing you this in collaboration with Ronewa Art Projects. And TASHI, thank you so much for making the time to chat with me. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you for the invitation.
Before we start talking about the specific works that you have with us at SAC, would you mind just giving a little introduction to yourself and sort of telling us who you are and maybe where you grew up and what role art played in that part of your life?
Yeah, so my name is TASHI BraueN. I'm living in Switzerland, in Zurich, and I'm an artist, a visual artist, mainly now in painting or in sculpture, in objects I'm working. So I grew up in Bern. My parents still live there. My mother is Tibetan and my father is Swiss. So first we grew up when we were smaller in the east side of Switzerland. Then we moved to Bern. In Bern, my parents always had those Do magazines around since I was small. So they actually from the 80s, 90s, and they were all over the place. So I kind of had them around. And then later on, actually, when I started art school, I started to collect them, the magazines. So I'd use staples, I say. So, and then I never used them. Sure, I did some collages with them during art school, pre-art school, actually. I used some of them. When I opened them, I see, oh, there is missing a page or two. So I started maybe when I was, 2019 or so with some collages out of the Do magazines. And actually now the Do works I'm showing or we are showing at SAC is really a new intervention, or it probably started out of this pandemic. It was last year in March, actually, when I was back in my studio, and I didn't have the access to the art supply shops, and I still had color, and I had those Do magazines, and I saw them as paper materials. So I was, I think I was really interested. What could I do with those Do's instead of just collaging and cutting, and so I started to a kind of really primitive printing making, or like, so I think it influenced me some weeks before. I was the first time I did monotype printing, so I had an introduction, but then it was closed, the studio, in the lockdown in March. So somebody told me from the printing studio that it's not a problem. Actually, printing, you can print everything. You can even have, if you have a wood in your studio. But back then, everything was open. It was February, so it kind of was back in my head still, this advice back then. So actually, I was thinking, you can even print 2 pages together or press making. So I started actually first with old sketchbooks, just to print, just to pour color in the sketchbooks and open them and see what splashes actually were coming out on the background. So it was like old sketchbooks I used. And then I saw, wow, that's pretty nice, so you have something old, you like your memories or like your sketches or your notes, and then on top of it, you have this new splash. So I like that a lot. So I started, well, I can use the Do magazine for that and see what's happening with the images and the intervention. So that's how it started. And probably it was a material I was growing up with it, and it made it easier, the access to this process.
Yeah, because the Do magazine had been around since 1941 in Switzerland as kind of a cultural force. But maybe can you kind of speak to its place in Swiss culture for people who might not be familiar with the publication?
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but my friends from school times or their parents, they also had it back then in the 80s, 90s. So it was a magazine you actually knew, and you could have it in shop or like smaller shops, and now it still exists. And actually, I should start to discover the new ones too. It's because nowadays, sure, with all this print media and the online media, so it slowly disappeared maybe from the audience because there's more magazines. But I started then actually also now in the lockdown to find specific do magazines from the 50s, 60s, and also 90s. I just ordered one from there is from Germany. I about Tibet. I remember it's one I probably already used it once. So it's really nice images of Tibet. Yeah. So I just found it, and it's always and I order it, and then it comes from Germany or from England. I had one, so I'm still collecting them and think, wow. But but knowing that I will still go on with those splashes, so it's something I do now regularly in my studio and see what's happening.
So Do is one of the series that you'll be showing with us, which is these sort of printmaking monotypes with the found magazines. But then you have another that's quite different that's called Cracks. And these are like bold, color-filled explorations, but there are actual physical cracks in the surface as well. So before we kind of go into the motivation and maybe some of the theory behind it, can you just speak to the process of how do you go about actually making these images and creating the bold cracks that divide the paper?
Back then, I was making a lot of photographs. My work was more into photography, so I had those cardboards in my studio, mostly for background. So they were backgrounds for studio photography for artworks. So it started back then when I had to move around my studio here in Zurich. I had to move regularly in my studio. So I just I just folded together and said, okay, I have to go again. So the background, they weren't artworks at the beginning. So uh, just like they opened up while I was transporting my studio, and I saw, wow, that's something that could be something. So actually, the process is mostly with, also with this work, it's like a trigger somewhere. I just in the studio, it's a lot of experiments in the corners or on the floors. So I'm kind of waiting sometimes for action which are not specific made for artworks. But when I take it out, or you go to the next studio, or you move, it could be something. I was thinking back then, and in 2016 when I went to the new studio, then I had those two cracked pieces, and I said, okay, let's let's try to do that again, or I mean, with different colors, and also I was really interested in school with artists or painters. I was kind of a painting class, so a lot of around me were painting, but I never painted during the whole time. I was more making photography or video. But I thought back then, okay, that would be the chance to kind of paint, yes, or draw or something like that, and really show it, the paper or the cracks. And so then I started actually to control also those cracks. So that means like I have the cardboard, I have them on the floor, so I always put them on the floor, and then I mostly I use a roller, and I it up with a color, and it doesn't have to be really bold or really monochrome. I like if you see somehow like drawings in it too. Also there, I pour it out the color directly on and go on. So it gives that different layers of colors. And after that, when the cardboards are painted, I cracked them, yeah, and that's something really spontaneous for SAC. I did now. I decided it was a concept. Okay, let's make 19 works, five big ones, seven smaller ones, and seven medium size, and let's don't crack it too fast. So it was like a process. I was thinking, let's make one crack, two crack, and lean them on the walls. And in the process of time, okay, maybe one more, because I was thinking I don't want to choose. It's really like those 19 works I'm making, and I don't want to make some extras, or even though it could have been a mistake, or in my understanding, I leave it. So it was like kind of, okay, let's be a little more, how would you say, generous, or not too brutal. So make one, leave it. And normally I say, okay, I crack it, and I have a cutter, and say that, and say, okay, the line will go there, and then it's finished. But this time I had those 19 works kind of in my studio, and I kind of worked with all together, that it's one group of work. So
that's interesting that you say it's spontaneous, because I was thinking about it watching the series. Once you make that kind of a crack, there's no going back in terms of the process. So I was wondering if you plan it out really specifically, but it sounds like it's maybe more from intuition. Would you say that's right?
it's intuitively. And the thing is, when you make the crack, or like this drawing, for me, it's almost like a drawing. There is no chance back then. Sure, you could paint over it, but you still see the crack, and but you can react again, and that's what I really liked. You can react on one crack, or you leave it, and when you come a second one, so it's a risk, yeah, for sure. It's somehow like a, and I like that, this risk, and then to say, okay, that's it. It's sure, it is like a gesture, or if you want to say. To break it.
The end result is just these incredibly bold, some of them are fairly large kind of color fields that are really playing with texture. I was wondering if you had any words for anyone who are maybe seeing minimalist work for the first time, or maybe coming to it in the gallery for the first time, of how they approach something that has that kind of simplicity and is really inviting the viewer to maybe look at it a different way than they would like a portrait or a landscape.
It's about your perception. I mean, minimal art, or maybe also abstract expressionism. It's like you go there, you feel yourself in a space. It's like a dialogue between the work and yourself. So, and what's happening in between. And I think that's what I really like about those kind of heroes back from the 50s, 60s. So that's what I'm really, and what's happening how close are you to a work, or how far are you, and see a texture of a painting, or so I would. It's hard to say that to a visitor. Yeah, you have to go close, or move around. I think uh, some see the color, the bold color. Some see maybe they go closer, and they will see the cracks. But after all, I hope that would be really the nicest thing, that people move around in the space, also see SAC differently.
No, I love all of that. Like, particularly what you were saying about the experience being that dialogue between the viewer and the object, and taking time with it. I think that that's something that maybe people don't initially understand about minimalist work, because they see it and they might not even get close. They might just say, oh, a red square, I get it. But that's not what it's about. It's about, I think, that exploration and the way that a piece unveils itself to the viewer when there's not a direct sort of quote-unquote message that it's giving you. It's just sort of, it's asking you, what are you experiencing right now? And you were saying that, these are, of course, things that you do in person, the back and forth, the moving around, but we are going to have a lot of online programming as well for your exhibition. So we're going to have a viewing room. Of course, we're making this video. So I would definitely encourage even people who aren't in Bangkok to take the time, even with your screen. It's no substitute for the original, but we do have some pretty high quality images that people can spend time with and look around, and I think they'll enjoy that as well. So yeah. Thank you for joining me. It was just absolutely a pleasure to meet you digitally, and to get to know more about you and your work. And again, we encourage everyone who is in Bangkok between the 17th of April and the 23rd of May to come by SAC Gallery in Sukhumvit. And those of you who can't, check out all of the online programming that we're going to have Again, that's going to be in collaboration with Ronewa Art Projects as well, and they'll have their own programming. So, yeah, thank you again, Tashi, and I look forward to working with you more and being in touch as the exhibition moves forward.
Thank you very much, Miranda. It was a pleasure